Everyone. Thank you very much for logging on today for this event. My name is Laura Bazanie from the German Marshall Fund's Brussels office, and I will be your host and moderator of today. Before we start with the conversation, I would like to thank my colleagues from the Congressional Affairs Program at the German Marshall Fund, and also the colleagues at the Quebec Government Office in Washington, D.C. for creating this event. As you know, today we will be discussing the results of the COP26 summit that ended in Glasgow last week, and in particular, the pivotal role of subnational governments in implementing the results of the summit and climate action. First of all, I would like to introduce Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, who will provide some introductory remarks. Congresswoman Escobar represents Texas' 16th Congressional District. She took office on January 2019 as a member of the US House of Representatives, and she is the first woman elected to the seat and the first of two Latinas from Texas to serve in Congress. Among her functions, Congresswoman Escobar serves on the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and we are delighted that she's joining us today to open up this conversation on climate action. So Congresswoman Escobar, the floor is yours.
Laura, thank you so much for that introduction. And I want to express my gratitude to everyone participating today, but especially to the German Marshall Fund for bringing us all together. It's so wonderful to be with you again. I look forward to the day that we can all be together in the same room once again as we were in 2019. But as Laura mentioned, I am very much, feel very passionate about addressing the climate crisis and making sure that the catastrophe that's unfolding before our eyes is something that we take on with extreme urgency. And I was incredibly privileged last week to be able to attend COP26, and I was a participant in a delegation with Speaker Nancy Pelosi and with members of the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, including Don Mckichin, who you'll hear from later. And you know, I've told folks that when I left Scotland, I left feeling two very strong emotions. The first was a sense of urgency and an understanding that while there was so much good work done in Edinburgh, in Glasgow, this was work that really should have been done and completed a decade or two ago. And so we are very, very much running behind. And that is why we are seeing the impacts of the climate crisis escalating month in and month out because we waited simply far too long. However, I also left feeling incredibly hopeful. The fact that we are going to tackle methane, the fact that fossil fuels are finally being addressed in the plan, the fact that we are talking about Mother Nature and forests and deforestation and the impact that has on the climate, the fact that we are reckoning with the need for us to put money into a system that will help countries that are suffering disproportionately because of our own emissions. These were such important conversations, and I think the agreement, although imperfect and not what we had all hoped to achieve, it was significant and it was historic and it was important. And so here we are now talking post COP26 about what comes next. And one of the other components I think that is so critical for us to realize as we think about addressing the climate crisis is our role, not just nations, but our role as individuals and our role indeed in terms of pushing our governments, our state governments, our local governments to be a part of the solution, to really capitalize on opportunities that will be presented by here in America through the Build Back Better plan, but also looking inwardly about what everyone can do to help move in the same direction. This is why, for me, my work is so important, not just here in Washington, D.C., not just on the international front with what we did at COP26, but in my own community, in my own district. My team and I have created a task force, a climate task force comprised of a very diverse group of people, from the private sector to the public sector, utilities and activists, all of us sitting around the same table. And our goal is to work on a framework that we can present by April of 2022, a framework that the community will receive about how to create our climate action plans. Too many communities and governments across the globe, and indeed in the United States, do not yet have climate action plans. We need them to get up to speed. We need them to acknowledge their role and their obligation and responsibility. And so in El Paso, Texas, in my district, we are working on that across jurisdictions, inside the public sector, inside the private sector, inside the citizenry. We all need to pull together. And so my hope is that your work here today, the conversations here today, can be a blueprint for all of us so that we continue to sound the alarm and take action, concrete action, to avert the worst disaster ahead. And so with that, I want to once again thank you all for sharing your brilliance, for your leadership, for including me, and for your partnership in ensuring that we do right by our planet and by our fellow citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Escobar, for taking the time and for the important messages that you brought to this conversation. Before I introduce my other fellow discussants, I would like to just offer a couple of thoughts as well from a European perspective on COP26. Climate change is clearly at the very core of the European interest right now, and it's increasingly shaping European foreign policy and cooperation with other countries. The EU arrived in Glasgow with high expectations and with an ambitious decarbonization plan laid out in the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55 strategy. And there was definitely disappointment at the last minute changes of the core text to weaken the provision on coal. The text was supposed to provide a commitment for country to phase out of coal, and it was transformed into phasing down coal production. But as Congresswoman Escobar said, this was the first time that a COP declaration mentioned fossil fuel, which is a real achievement because we don't really come back from these steps forward, as more and belated as they might seem. So I believe that phasing out fossil fuel will remain a priority for the European Union in terms of climate diplomacy, both internally and externally. And that the steps forwards in the text, but also the G20 declaration ending investments in coal production abroad, and sectoral initiatives such as the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance are steps in the direction that we want to move forward to. In absolute terms, we are definitely far from where we want to be, and moving forward, it will be absolutely fundamental that the EU and other developed countries really come through on climate finance, as this is the only way to make sure that the tensions that are inevitable under the COP regime of differentiated responsibility will not take over and compromise the global carbonization process, but also that we make sure that climate justice is really at the core of our global efforts to fight climate change. So I would like to now invite to the stage my fellow discussants and hear from their firsthand experience from Glasgow. We have the pleasure of having with us today Jean Lemire, Quebec's envoy for climate change, Northern and Arctic affairs. He's a biologist by training and a renowned science communicator whose work on climate change and biodiversity has led to major scientific missions. And we also have Taryn Finnessy, the acting executive director and policy director of the US Climate Alliance. where she helps to advance the climate and clean energy policy priority of the alliances of governors and their offices. So I would like to turn this on to you and learn what are your takeaways from COP26 and how do you think we move forward from here. So Jean, maybe you can start, and then Taryn.
Thank you so much, Laura, for this kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. Thank you to the German Marshall Fund and to the Quebec Government Office in Washington for creating this event. And a very warm welcome to our partners and friends from the US Climate Alliance and the US federal government, who also have joined us today to share their perspective, position, and expertise on this important topic matter. First, I would like to share the same feeling that Congresswoman Escobar just shared with us. Coming back from Glasgow, it's a mixed feeling, I should say. There's that show, at least, the importance to act and to act now. Like she said, we are probably 1 decade or two late, but this re-emphasized the importance of acting now and acting together. So, Glasgow, all the focus were on Glasgow and where the COP26 was taking place, and given the urgent context of climate change, this major international meeting not only re-emphasized the importance of increasing global action ambition to achieve the Paris Agreement objectives, but also underlined the importance of unification and collaboration at all levels to achieve these goals. An urgent situation requires swift responses. This is especially true as the impacts of inaction become clearer and the rapid speed at which GHG emission must be reduced increases. As we have seen once again during COP26, state and regional government have a major role to play in accelerating the transition to a low carbon economy. And while they develop and implement ambitious and innovative climate measures locally, they can also contribute to the global dialogue on climate. State and regional governments have key power across the most important sectors for climate action, including energy, infrastructure, land use, and finance. As such, we should see ourselves not only as important links between national government policymaking and city and business action, but also as catalysts for action that can spread the inspiration and influence both upwards and downwards. If you allow me, I would like to illustrate this more clearly by coming back on new engagement that the government of Quebec has taken during COP26 in 2 areas that were central to the discussion, namely fossil fuel production and international climate finance. In October, Quebec Premier François Legault announced a ban on extraction and exploration of fossil fuels on the province territory, which is a very important step taken to accelerate the energy transition needed to meet the Paris Agreement goals. This commitment has allowed us to join the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, what we call BOGA, during COP26. BOGA is a new international coalition of government and stakeholders working together to facilitate the managed phase out of oil and gas production. It is interesting to highlight that amongst the first dozen of members of this coalition launched in Glasgow, there are subnational governments, namely Quebec, California, and Wales. Another central issue at COP26 was how to mobilize the financing necessary to support mitigation and adaptation actions to address climate change. In order to support these efforts, Quebec has pledged 10 million Canadian dollars to the Adaptation Fund, more than tripling our previous contribution in 2019. Needless to say that we also keep taking action locally. At COP26, our Premier, François Legault, announced investment of $5 billion to electrify more than half of the urban buses in circulation in Quebec by 2030. We are making electrification our priority, mainly in the transportation sector, but also in building, heating, and other industrial activities. And by investing in key sectors of the economy, Quebec's actions are aligned with the congressional members of the Select Committee for Climate Crisis, member of the US Climate Alliance, and our European partners' effort to tackle our shared dual challenge of COVID-19 recovery and climate change together through greening the economy. We believe we can provide solutions to support their goals to this end through clean and renewable energy, green technology, low carbon battery manufacturing, and critical and strategic minerals. With trade agreements with all the members countries of the J7, including with the US through the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, and through the comprehensive economic and trade agreement with Europe, we are positioned to support the green transition with our highly integrated supply chains, especially in rolling out the green infrastructure package in the US. We keep saying this, as well as taking action individually, subnational governments must work together to both complement and inspire the work of our federal partners. Achieving net zero by 2050 requires rapid structural change across the entire global economy. These are only achievable if we collaborate. And that collaboration needs to be across border and across the entire society, with business, investors, civil society, and governments of all levels working together. This is a matter of sharing an opportunity. We need to take this opportunity to do things right. It's now. To move to a clean economy benefits to all of us through creating jobs, focusing on sustainable development, and saving our ecosystem, because yes, biodiversity will be part of the solution as well. And by working together, we can get the transition going faster, and we need to go faster. At the same time, we must work together to deliver practical solutions on adaptations and finance. That's why Quebec wants to engage with more friends and partners. From carbon market, climate finance, green technology, electric transportation, renewable energies to green hydrogen, there are enormous opportunities. I would like to end by saying that with immediate action and strong collaboration, we can lead the way towards the deep transformation that our economy must take in order to achieve a carbon neutral future. We will be there. You can count on us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Tarine, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for having me today. I completely agree with what the Congressman and others have said this morning about COP being very mixed emotions. I texted a friend on the way back and said, you know, it's equal parts inspiring and frustrating. And so I echo those feelings and sentiments. For those of you who are new to the Climate Alliance or are not familiar with our organization, the US Climate Alliance was formed in June 2017 by a small group of US governors who were committed achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement in response to the previous federal administration's decision to withdraw the US from this international accord. Since then, the alliance has rapidly grown to include a sizable and bipartisan group of governors from states across our country, with our most recent addition being Governor John Bel Edwards of Louisiana, joining in May of this year, and who also attended COP during the first week. Our coalition now represents 62% of US GDP, 56% of the US population, and 43% of emissions. Our Climate Alliance members are cutting emissions, accelerating climate action policies, building resilience to the impacts of climate change, and promoting clean energy deployment at the state and federal level. Alliance states represent a large enough share of the economy that through climate smart coordinated action, we can begin to move markets. We can bring down the cost and increase the availability of access to resilient zero carbon products, services, and practices. And what we've discovered from this subnational coalition is that it's working. From 2005 to 2019, Alliance states cut our greenhouse gas emissions faster while continuing to grow our economies, producing higher levels of economic output than the rest of the country and creating over 100,000 new clean energy jobs and building resilience to the impacts of climate change. A lot of positive opportunities there. And while we've made progress in cutting our greenhouse gas emissions to date, it is very clear that more work needs to be done to put us on the pathway consistent with what science says is needed to avoid catastrophic climate change. Thankfully, we now have a partner in the federal government and can shift our focus from backstopping federal rules and defending challenges to critical climate policies and regulations to instead advancing foundational and leading edge climate policies, including by driving collaborative multi-state action. Together, Alliance states have built a foundation of ambitious climate action that provides a durable roadmap for national policymakers and the Biden administration. And in the last 10 months, across the suite of proposed and finalized federal climate actions, many can trace their roots and actions pioneered by Alliance states, from clean cars to methane and green banks to 30 by 30 conservation goals. Our states are testing, refining, and implementing next generation climate policies so we can go further, faster together. Earlier this month, as the world's leaders convened in Glasgow for what was the most consequential UN climate conference since Paris, governors and high-level state officials from more than half of the Alliance states attended COP26 and demonstrated how they are leading the world in the development of new, innovative, and effective climate policies and technologies. The Alliance collectively identified 8 policy priority areas related to power, buildings, industry, transportation, just transition and equity, resilience, natural and working lands, and the social cost of greenhouse gases. It's a big list. Within each of these priority areas, individual Alliance states committed to more than 40 specific and new high impact actions that will accelerate greenhouse gas emission reductions and complement and spur federal efforts, driving forward the sort of tangible, impactful implementation and results needed to make the US climate targets a reality. These new high impact actions build and expand on years of increasingly ambitious commitments and actions from all of the Alliance states and complement strong climate and clean energy action plans being developed to guide the work in the years ahead. These bold new actions include several states committing to 100% net zero operating emissions for new construction beginning in 2030, 100% new zero emission light duty vehicle sales by 2035, implementation of a low carbon fuel standard to reduce the carbon intensity of fuels, and conserving at least 30% of land and coastal waters by 2030. Alliance states showed the world that national climate targets are both durable and achievable through sustained, ambitious, and bipartisan-led state climate action, and that states are uniquely positioned to nimbly demonstrate to the world what works, and then quickly scale it up and out. Our collaboration at COP with like-minded subnational leaders illustrated how together we can catalyze greater national ambition and also pressure our national leaders to do more when needed. This collective effort is intended to drive further ambition among subnational leaders as well as national governments and showcase strong examples of visionary policies alliance states will continue to pursue to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you very much, Taryn, and both of you. I mean, it looks clear to me that we all arrived at the end of COP with mixed feelings, and we also all agree that there's more work to do, but that collaboration is at the core of our efforts moving forward. And so I'd like to start the discussion by asking a question to Jean, because Quebec is right now a carbon market with California, which I think it's well, to my knowledge at least, is the only case of a carbon market across borders. So a great example of collaboration, a subnational collaboration. Can you tell us more about how this experience is going and what we can learn from that?
Well, thank you, Laura. It's a great experience, to be honest. We started that long time ago, and that collaboration with California is great. You know, we learned from different experience. For example, you know, we followed what was the market in Europe, and it gave us the opportunity to you know, going better. You know, being better by putting a floor, per example, on prices. But that collaboration between California and Quebec is a very good example on how we should and work together. This is very important. This is also encourage the implementation of new technology, greener technology, you know, and it's very very important. It put a price on carbon, and this is the most important thing that I would like to share with you. You know, we have to put a price on pollution. We have to put a price on carbon, and we hope that, you know, the other provinces in Canada will join the market, because we really need to be at the same level. You know, so California and Quebec market is a very good example. I think that now it's, you know, it's time for us to all work together to try to encourage, you know, a price on carbon. This is very, very important. For us also, it is important to, you know, we are in a situation where, you know, 99.7% of our energy is clean, which is a good thing, of course, but it's also a real challenge when it's time to put new target, because we don't have a coal factory to close or something. So we have to work really, really, really hard, and it's not easy, to be honest. But we want also to be the, let's say, the green battery of North America. We want to share our clean energy, you know, with our neighbor. Just think of the Northeast with the New England and New York State. You know, those are very important deal that we are doing. So it gives you more time also to build your own clean infrastructure, you know. So this is a role that we want to play, and it's very, very important. We are on different platforms. We work with different organizations to trying to say the importance of putting a price on carbon, and it will come anyway. You know, with the CBAM, for example, that is, you know, developing in Europe, it's going to come. So we have to work together again to be in advance. We have to put a price on carbon, so we will be in the same kind of deal together. You know, if we don't put a price on carbon, you know, it's going to be very hard. And I think again that, you know, that market with California brings a good example on how we can work together, and it brings lots of credibility also to a system like our carbon market with California. So very important, put a price on carbon and work together.
Thanks. Taryn, I would like to come to you because as Jean said, we know that we need to implement certain measures, like, for example, putting a price on carbon and just coalescing around a common target. For example, phasing out of fossil fuel, which was like a key topic at COP26. I mean, you're a very experienced coalition builder. This is really part of the work that you do. And in your experience, like, how can we concretely, what are things that we can concretely do to bring to the table major producers of fossil fuel, like the United States as well, to bring the necessary change that we know we need to make to decarbonize?
Thank you. That's a really big question. And it's hard because coalition building takes time and it requires building trust, which takes time. But I think there's hope because we're seeing it happen, and we're seeing it happen quickly and alongside innovation. And I mean, look at the AIM Act, the American Infrastructure and Manufacturing Act that passed. It's the only climate law that passed under the Trump administration. And it brought together industry and environmentalists and folks that have historically been at odds with one another, came to the table and found solutions. And domestically here in the United States and some of our Climate Alliance states, we're seeing waste management companies take proactive roles in methane reduction, and many energy companies are expanding renewables in their portfolios. Change is hard, but it doesn't mean it's bad, and there's opportunities in change. And I really am hopeful that some of these industries are starting to see that, but we have to focus more on those opportunities and how it can better the lives and grow our economies. And we're seeing when implementation happens, those opportunities are starting to be realized. So let me give an example of that. Prior to coming to the Alliance, I worked for the state of Colorado. We're an interior Western state. It has a very strong agriculture and oil and gas economy and is deeply, deeply committed to the protection of their wild lands. But it's also a very drought-prone state. And that threatens the viability of dryland agriculture on the Eastern Plains. Thankfully, those Eastern Plains are also windy and sunny. And what we saw was wind turbines and wind and solar farm installations going in. And these farmers that were being pushed to the brink because of drought and questioning whether or not they could stay in business were getting paid to have turbines installed on their land. And that revenue kept them in business for when droughts hit. So renewable energy was actually allowing them to maintain their rural agricultural lifestyle. The same is true with utility scale farms, where it creates new revenues for counties that can pay for critical services like schools and hospitals. So not only is it addressing the mitigation side of things, it's also serving as a tool for adaptation. But we have to be able to have those difficult conversations, and we have to be okay being uncomfortable, because in that discomfort, we can start to find compromise and we can start to forge that path forward. And we have to be having those conversations now. We have to be staying goal-oriented and outcome-focused. And we have to be committed to driving forward to find the solutions that can work for everyone. It's going to take compromise. It's going to take push and pull. But I think that we're starting to see market transformation. And we really believe that as we as subnational states start to implement policies and collaborations that bring folks to the table, we can scale those up. Methane's another great example of how we've brought industry to the table to find regulations and rules to scale back methane, and that has been able to be scaled up to the federal level. And so it's happening. It needs to happen more quickly, but I think we need to be less divisive and really, really come to the table and understand one another's perspectives, sit in that discomfort, and then find a path forward from there.
Yeah, changing the narrative is definitely something that is happening, but needs to happen much more. And actually, Jean, you've communicated a lot on climate action and sustainability, and I'd like to know, how do you think we should talk about climate, especially now, as Tarine was saying, that we need to have to build this consensus, and we need also to bring in as many people as possible to push politically for this change to happen. So how do you think, like, if you could give an advice to how to improve the public debate around climate, what would that be now?
Well, I will take this debate on a slightly different track, I think, because I'm in that business since well, too long, more than 25 years. And when I started long time ago to do films and write book about climate change, the public was not following a lot. Now, they are part of the game. They want to do some changes, but they do so because we were able to communicate the emergency to act. At the same time, more and more, I think that they feel often helpless in the face of the task that we are facing. So I think that we should bring the debate toward another avenue, and it's nature. Why? Because more and more we realize that we want to protect what we like. And if we present, the importance of nature in a global way of communication, we will make some gain. And it's very, very important. Everybody likes nature. And if we are able to bring, at this other level, I think that we will make very important gains. And this is also what we see on the international, because more and more the two conventions are working together. The nature-based solution are also, a good way of finding solution for climate change. So I'm not saying that we should not, cut, all the arguments about, the importance to fight climate change. I'm just saying that if we add another level by talking more about nature, we will bring more and more, the public, and we need the public if we want to succeed. Too often I think that we are in our office, talking about very specific solution that we see because that's our job. But if we want to succeed, we need to bring the public with us, and I think that nature can offer that new way of thinking. And just think about, all the marketing that we did over the last decades on, the importance to change your phone, or to consume more and more. Put all those efforts for protecting nature, and you can then start a new movement where the change of mentality will be at the base of our actions. And I think this is, one of the solution for the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's also true that we live more and more disconnected from nature, I find, and that makes a difference because, well, I'm from a very small town in the countryside, and when I go back, I see that people that live close to nature understand some things on a much more visceral level in a way. Well, Tarine, I wanted to pick up on something else that you said. I mean, you mentioned that this administration is an ally in climate action, which is great. But I mean, we know that during the Trump administration, that was a very difficult time in climate cooperation and transatlantic relations in general. And American cities and states really stepped up in that period of time and maintained alive international cooperation around climate. Now the federal government is much is on board with the climate action. But do you think that cities and states will keep up this international role that they assumed, and will be also kind of key to build resilience in climate cooperation?
Yeah, I mean, the world understandably has concerns about the durability of federal climate action, given what's happened in the past with previous administrations' withdrawals from the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, and a myriad of other agreements originally negotiated and championed by the US. But states have really reshaped our role, both nationally and internationally, and they're no longer going to take a back seat. We've worked really hard to instead forge a new collaborative whole of government partnership with this administration. And let's be clear, there's no path to 1.5 degrees without states and subnationals. And we will continue to push forward because the cost of inaction is far too great. And we're seeing the impacts of climate change already on the ground in our states, on those front lines. I think while the past has been really challenging, it has also created leadership opportunities at the state level. And by educating the international community about our system of cooperative federalism and the immense amount of authorities that are vested in US governors, as well as the long record of state climate leadership, the Alliance really can build and increase the trust in US action. And at the same time, as the federal government builds a new federal floor to increase national ambition, there's a role for Alliance members to continue to implement the next generation of bipartisan climate actions so that the federal government can then scale those up when it's feasible. So this back and forth collaborative relationship really serves the globe as a whole in making sure that the US shows up and drives towards our both collective and individual climate goals.
Thanks. I have another question for Jean, actually. So, I mean, we talked before about collaboration and collaboration across states, and also the fact that Quebec is a leader in renewable energy. You mentioned that 99% of electricity production in Quebec is from renewables, which is impressive. And you also mentioned before that Quebec has a climate cooperation program that is actually, if I'm not mistaken, is financed from the carbon market that we talked about before. So another kind of best practice. So I want to know, how is Quebec supporting other countries in the developing world, especially through its own success story?
Well, this is for us very, very important. We started that, in Paris in 2015, where we became the first government to give money to the fund for developing countries, and we continue since that. And there's lots of different programs that we have put in place to reinforce I'll say the capacity building of those countries, and also make sure that we transfer technologies for those countries. So it's important to work on both sides of climate change, mitigation, of course, but adaptation as well. And this is why we create partnership with local NGOs or learning in university, for example, to be sure that we are not just sending a check. we want to be part of their solution. And we think that by creating partnership, it's very, very important. So, like I said, at Glasgow, we announced another 10 million for the adaptation fund. We work with FAO also, on another program in Africa and in Haiti. We gave money to the African Bank of Development, and in all those intervention, we make sure that it's not just a transfer of money, but we are really trying to create the capacity building where we want to work. We focus on francophone countries, and we think it is very, very important, and it has to be clear that climate change is not only something that we should make action. It's a global problem, and we have to make our part. We have to help other countries, and I think that this is the most important thing that we have to do. Include everybody into this. We are talking about the importance of working together, states, governments, subnational governments. We have to think more widely and try to include everybody in that in that challenge, and this is for us very, very important. Knowledge transfer, new technology, and building capacity.
Thank you, John. Tarine, do you want to come in as well on these? We have a couple of minutes more.
Sure, thank you. To just echo this point about the role of subnationals in ensuring kind of broader global equity, I think that we really need to recognize that, and we've seen in the last 2 years, especially, that health and environmental and economic crises have disproportionate impacts to overburdened communities domestically and to less developed countries globally. And I think we really need to go forwards, centering equity and adjust economic transition in our efforts to achieve our climate goals. And we can't expect the same from everyone. In the Alliance, we say that we meet people where they are, and we set expectations from there. And I think we need to think about how we can help those that don't have the capacity to implement these solutions. I think we need to be creative about how we can utilize our experiences and scale those up, not just to the domestically within the United States or nationally within the United States, but also globally. And many of our member states are quite large, and they actually have more in common in some ways with other nations than they do sometimes with other states. And so there is an opportunity for them to share those lessons learned. We see this with MOUs that exist between US states and countries abroad. And so I think thinking forward and reinforcing what I said about opportunities, this is an opportunity to do things better than we have in the past, and to help really improve the quality of life and broadly implement climate solutions across the globe going forward.
Yeah, and that's an example of how climate can actually help us to make other policies better, actually. So we have a spontaneous question, and since we have a couple of minutes more, I think I'll bring it up from the chat. Jean, you mentioned this, so maybe I'll direct this to you, but Tarine, obviously, if you have something to add, please feel free. Andres is asking why there is so much focus on climate and environment, emissions, carbon, etc., and not that much on nature. How can we move away from a humanocentric worldview?
Well, that's a very, very good question, Andres, and it's a little bit like I was saying. I think that we have to refocus and include nature more and more. And there's one really important thing when you think that most of the countries have decided to go for carbon neutral in 2050. Well, the nature are carbon sinks. If we don't take care of that, of course, we will not succeed our fight against climate change. No way. We have to protect, the nature. We have to take care of it. And again, it's more than that because it's a change in mentality. And this is what we need more and more. So what we see is the two big UN conventions, one on one side, climate change, and on the other side, biodiversity, are working more and more together. And I can tell you, Andres, that we are working really, really hard right now because we are preparing a new global plan on biodiversity. We are, in negotiation, and we will be in Geneva in January for 3 weeks. 3 weeks trying to put a new global plan for the planet and biodiversity. And this is very, very difficult, I should say. Some countries think that nature is just a way of, let's say, making money, and it should not go that way. So we are trying really hard to bring nature and climate change together with that new global plan in biodiversity. And we will have the new COP in biodiversity in Kunming, China in April and May. And we really hope that, we will be able to have very important targets. One of the targets that you probably heard about is the 30% of the planet will be protected in 2030. This is not easy, I should say, but we work really, really hard to more and more have a global way of thinking our planet. It's like you said, it's not just carbon, climate change, but we have to think more globally to be sure that we will prepare the next generation also. And again, because we love nature, is therefore not natural to protect what we love. So I think that this is a very important message, and your question was a good one.
And I'll just jump in real quick to say that, our natural working lands portfolio that we work on that's focused on nature-based solutions is our biggest portfolio as far as who's participating from our states. I think the last 2 years have shown us how important our natural world is for our mental health, for our well-being as a society. I really hope that if we're looking for silver linings from a global pandemic, a piece of that is that we really need to protect our natural worlds, but they're part of the solution. Our Hawaii is one of our member states, and they say that net zero isn't enough. We should be going for net negative. And this biodiversity issue is so critical and key to them as an island state. But it's also across all of our states. They see natural climate solutions as a piece that they need to be working on, that they need to be driving forward, not just because of the resilience it builds, but because of the sinks that it creates, but also because of the increases in the quality of life it provides. So I don't necessarily think it is about nature or human centric. I think preserving nature does help us as humans and as a human society. And so I think we should think about it holistically. These are all intertwined together, and we can't just look at one piece of the puzzle. We have to really include those natural climate solutions as true, real, viable solutions to get us to where we need to go with our goals.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to both of you. Now, before we end and conclude this event, we have with us Congressman Donald Mckichin. Congressman Mckichin represents the 4th Congressional District of Virginia in the U.S. House of Representatives, and he serves as co-chair of the House Democratic Environmental Message Team, co-chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Transportation, Infrastructure, Environment, and Energy Policy Council, and vice chair of the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Coalition. So we are very pleased that Congressman Mckichin is here with us to give us some final remarks to end this event. So Congressman Mckichin, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And good morning to all. I'm honored to join you today to discuss the need for subnational collaboration as we look to implement the policies and agreements made during the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference. The climate crisis is, as we all know, the greatest existential threat that we face, and its impacts are being felt more intensely than ever. We are at a critical crossroads. The decisions that we make and the actions that we take now will have long-lasting impacts in our ability to mitigate the effects of climate change and preserve the health and well-being of future generations and our planet. Inaction and half measures are no longer an option. As we know, in August, UN scientists issued a code red warning for climate change. And we are seeing those impacts play out here in the United States and around the globe. Unprecedented floods, wildfires, storms, and heat waves are devastating communities. Without immediate and bold climate action, these extreme weather events will continue to become more common and more severe. In just the last year alone, extreme weather has cost the United States more than $100 billion. And these impacts have disproportionately fallen on historically disenfranchised communities, including low-income communities, tribal and indigenous communities, and communities of color. Policymakers and elected leaders from around the globe must act on this information and begin to take meaningful steps to cut emissions, curb global warming, and slow humankind's contribution to the worsening climate state. That's why the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow was critically important this year. It's also why there needs to be coordinated collaboration and broad efforts from all corners of the globe to effectively combat climate change and to ensure a healthy, livable planet for future generations. Thankfully, under President Biden's leadership and with Democratic majorities in both chambers of the Congress, the United States is back in the fight against climate change. Hallelujah. From re-entering the Paris Climate Agreement to bipartisan infrastructure deals, the one that was just signed last week, I should say this week rather, to our continued efforts on the Build Back Better Act, my colleagues and I are fighting to bring strong and comprehensive solutions to the climate crisis. The bipartisan infrastructure deal will help strengthen our nation's resilience to extreme weather and climate change, set up the infrastructure for a clean future, and build a clean power grid. Let's make no mistake about it, BIF is an important step in modernizing the American infrastructure and moving towards a net zero emissions economy by 2050. But we all know more must be done. That's why Congress is now focusing its sights on the Build Back Better Act, and we need to get that bill across the finish line. This legislative package will take decisive action that is needed to meet the moment, address the climate crisis with the urgency it demands, and set the U.S. on a path to meet its ambitious climate energy goals. It will cut pollution, reduce energy costs, create millions of good-paying jobs, life-sustaining jobs, family-supporting jobs, advance environmental justice priorities, all important issues that I have particularly focused on throughout my time in Congress. Under the previous administration, we saw firsthand how a lack of strong leadership can slow progress and compound the climate crisis. Despite the challenges that arose, we also watched as states and localities stepped up to the plate to do their part in the fight against climate change. For instance, in my home state of Virginia, there have been notable efforts to aid the transition to a clean economy by joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. This program will help ensure Virginia is a leader in the fight against climate change while positioning the state as a center for economic activity as we look towards the transition to a clean energy economy. Virginia has also made substantial investments in sustainable public transit, like our passenger rail system, and clean energy sources like wind and solar. Following the previous administration's decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement, over 470 mayors from across the nation joined together to commit to reducing emissions and upholding the goals set forth in the climate accords through significant climate action and policy. We've seen other examples of regional collaboration between subnational entities like the Western Climate Initiative in the mid-2000s that are focused on lowering greenhouse gas emissions. These sorts of efforts are exactly what we need as we look towards addressing the climate crisis going forward. Subnational entities will play an integral role in our collective efforts to combat the climate change. As these historic legislative packages pass out of Congress and are signed into law, billions of dollars will be made available to states and localities. It will be imperative that they seek out and apply these funds to help bolster their efforts at the subnational level. You know, before Congress, I spent years in the Virginia General Assembly. State and local leaders play an invaluable role in supporting federal efforts while representing and advocating for the interests of their communities. I encourage all subnational leaders to engage in open dialogue with their federally elected leaders to share their goals and priorities, coordinate with your regional partners to bring new ideas and approaches to the forefront. You know, we often say that we have 50 laboratories of democracy with our 50 states. Well, the same goes with our approach to climate change. We've got great laboratories out there in all 50 states. Let's bring them together and come up with the ideas that we need to make sure that we preserve our future. Climate change knows no borders. It will only be through our collaborative efforts at all levels of government and with our international partners that we'll be able to make meaningful progress in the fight against climate change. I'm going to continue to do my part. I know that together we will come together and meet the moment and do what is necessary to preserve our future, to make sure that, as we Eagle Scouts like to say, that we leave the campground better than we found it. Thank you for having me. Thank you for your conference, and God bless you all.
Thank you very much, Congressman Mckichin. And I want to thank all the speakers today for really highlighting how subnational governments are being laboratories of climate action and leading the way forward and providing so many examples of best practices that I'm happy we had the chance to present and highlight today. So thank you very much again, Congressman Mckichin, Congresswoman Escobar, and also to Tareen and John for taking questions and answering them. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you to everyone who logged on today for this conversation. Thank you very much. See you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.